Chinese tech giant WeChat has deleted Scott Morrison's message to Chinese Australians amid the growing tensions. In the post, Mr Morrison criticised the false image of an Australian soldier while making it clear the diplomatic spat would not diminish respect for the Chinese community. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg is hit out at the platform.
Well, that decision, obviously, to delete the Prime Minister's post is a matter for the platform to explain. Well, it's unnecessary.
Right, it's time now for my international panel. Joining me is Sky News co-host of Outsiders, James Morrow, and Sky News host and former senior Australian Defence Force officer, Kate McGregor, in Canberra. James, I'll start with you if I can. Chinese social media WeChat claims that the post violates regulations and is misleading. Yet over on Twitter, the original offensive post from Chinese officials is still up. In fact, it's pinned at the top of the Chinese officials' Twitter handle. It's a real double standard.
Well, actually, I don't think there's a double standard at all, Peter. I think that WeChat, Twitter, all of these big social media platforms all have the same standard. They want to do whatever they can to stay in favour with the Chinese Communist Party. WeChat because they're operating in China, Twitter because they would love to operate in China. So I don't really actually see that there's much of a double standard there at all. WeChat, of course, is doing exactly what they're supposed to do, which is censor Scott Morrison. Twitter is doing what they want to do, which is, let this chucklehead from the Foreign Ministry say his offensive stuff while at the same time putting warnings on Donald Trump tweets and everything else. So, we see that the standard that all of these tech giants, whether they're in Silicon Valley or Shanghai, have in common, and that is really, sadly, that they want to do the bidding of Communist China.
Kate, Labor were a bit inconsistent again on this issue today. The PM said that Anthony Albanese, the Labor opposition leader, was each way elbow. Fair enough?
Well, yeah, they've changed their line this week. And just quickly rounding out what James said on WeChat, that is utterly unsurprising given there are no innocent arms of the Chinese state. They all serve the state and are tools of the PLA and their broader whole of spectrum operations. And that particular platform was used by Labor in the Bennelong by-election, and it raised some concerns amongst members of the Australian intelligence community at that time. But the fact is, Albanese is reverting to type. This is where he started on the left of the party as a young official. I can remember him in the 80s when he was completely opposite to the character we're now seeing. He opposed every substantial reform of the Hawke-Keating government, used to refer to Keating essentially as someone who should have been in the Liberal Party. And on foreign policy, he has always been a knee-jerk anti-American. So, and the fact is, the most substantial Labor figure in the country now is Daniel Andrews, who is pressing on with his toadying to the PLA with the Belt and Road Initiative. So it doesn't surprise me at all to see Albanese in a conflict of disloyalties, which is a familiar position for him.
Okay, but just before I go, earlier on in the show I was talking to my panel about the calls from the crossbench for the CDF to be stood aside, or in some cases Bob Catter says he should be sacked. What do you make of that?
I saw your segment, Peter, and like you, I have worked directly with and for Angus Campbell over a 20-year period. I do have some regard for him, but I do believe the imposition of collective punishment, firstly on those holders of the meritorious unit citation, most of whom are innocent, some of whom are dead, that was a gratuitous insult to those members, and collective punishment is innately wrong. I also think disbanding 2 Squadron is an egregious error. And the fact is, the more revelations, especially by Ben Packham earlier this week, about who was in various elements of the chain of command and presided over recognition of Orders of Australia for former COs of the SAS Regiment and the promotion of a 1-star officer from Special Operations Command to a 2-star position in the Indo-Pacific. Both Angus Campbell and Rick Burr were involved in those decisions, and I think at the least they should recuse themselves from this process.
Yeah, I think they absolutely should recuse themselves from the process. I was surprised that they were allowed to be a part of it, both those serving men, because That was a big surprise to me, to be honest. I want to go back to the United States if we can. James, this 46-minute-long speech uploaded to social media by Donald Trump, again pushing the claim that the election's been won illegally. He's dubbed this speech the most important he's ever given, calling out alleged voter fraud in the November election.
And if we don't root out the fraud, the tremendous and horrible fraud that's taken place in our 2020 election, we don't have a country anymore. So with the resolve and support of the American people, we will restore honesty and integrity to our elections, and we will restore trust in our system of government.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, James, his sort of legal campaign is headed to a dead end.
Yeah.
Is this part of his post-election, post-White House positioning for a platform to carry him into the next 4 years, do you think?
Well, I think very possibly you're looking at a situation where Donald Trump is trying to essentially be something you've never had in the United States before, an opposition leader. And that is where I think he's kind of positioning himself. Remember, Trump got 10 million more votes this time around than he did last time around. Those are 10 million voters that the Republican Party and he wants to keep, and he's going to have to show something that says he's still fighting for them. So there's a lot of people who want him to keep up this fight. An awful lot of Americans think that there was some funny business around the campaign and the election, not necessarily enough to have tipped it over the line to Biden. You know, I personally think Biden won fair and square, but I also suspect that there may have been some monkey shines happening somewhere behind the scenes in some of these jurisdictions where a lot of ballots came in with just all marked for Biden, and the statistics just don't really quite add up on all of that. Nevertheless, you know, let's also remember that 4 years ago, the Clinton campaign and the Democrats spent 4 years pushing the Russia hoax and the Russia conspiracy, so they almost set the rules for this sort of thing. I think the best result would be that they do investigate, that there is some questioning of this, you know, and if there is irregularities, they reform the electoral process, because otherwise, every 4 years, America is going to go down this road of the other side, half the country, feeling like they got cheated.
I want to swing into the UK. Kate, you watch it all as keenly as I do. The vaccine hits the ground next week. 40,000 people will get their shots. It'll be the most vulnerable. Obviously, we're talking about a British winter now and escalating numbers. How much do you think that this vaccine can turn the tide for Boris Johnson? He's certainly copped it. You know, in the last 12 months, it's really gone against him.
Look, I'm hoping that it is everything that the trials have indicated, Peter. There's a note of optimism in it. They've fast-tracked it. I wish them really well, not just for Boris Johnson's fate, but for the good of the country. And again, we're looking forward to the Australian equivalent of it because, as you know, a lot of Josh Frydenberg's forward projections are based on a vaccine being available sometime mid-year next year. To coincide with the tapering off of JobKeeper and so on. So we've got a lot of eggs in this basket too. So I wish them well. And they did have a false dawn a little, and it's a bit like Australia, I guess, with summer and the longer days are leading people to feel a bit more optimistic. So let's hope we can have a vaccine in place before we go off daylight saving and back into the gloom. I think it's, and I think it would be a great moment for Boris Johnson if he is able to get this pig to market, as John Howard used to say.
All right, we'll leave it there. Kate McGregor, James Morrow, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.